Conscious Creative from MuseWorks Audio. Welcome to The Conscious Creative from MuseWorks Audio. The Conscious Creative is a podcast featuring interviews with artists who are doing transformational work in their craft and in their communities. Join us as we discuss different artistic philosophies, give you brand new tools to bring back to your creative spaces, and build a community of artists dedicated to deepening their relationship with their craft. I'm your host, Mike Irish. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to episode 24 of The Conscious Creative. Today, I interviewed David James McCallum, and I first came across David's music through my friends over at BC Unsigned podcast, and they had posted some of David's Gaelic hip-hop. I was immediately interested and intrigued because it wasn't gimmicky. It was clearly someone who has great respect for not only hip-hop, but also for the Gaelic language. Today we spoke about his vast musical influences as he was growing up, his views on the similarities between hip-hop, folk music, and punk rock, which, a lot of people would probably think are very different forms of music, but David sees a through line as well. We spoke about how he came to study Gaelic and what his history is with that, as well as how his understanding of Gaelic folklore, the language, and the culture has shaped the way that he views the world and how it's helped him grow as a human being, and the importance of language. So I thought it was a really insightful interview. David also has a show on Side Door, which there are links for in the show notes if you want to attend and check out some of his folk music live. And just before we get into the show, I have one announcement. I've been running this free PDF series out of my studio, MuseWorks Audio, based on Bobby Borg's book, Music Marketing for the DIY Musician. If you are an artist who's trying to kind of do things yourself and you want to expand your audience, but you don't know how to market yourself, you don't really know what direction you're moving in, I would really suggest hopping on. It's a free PDF series. We'll be breaking down the book chapter by chapter with PDF exercises and videos to accompany the PDF exercises to give you a clear idea. Out of all the things that I've done through my studio, this is the one that people seem to be the most excited about. I think about 30 people signed up for it, and I would love to just keep growing that number, keep educating artists on how to market their music and make more wise business decisions. So if that's of interest to you, I have a link below that you can sign up, and I will send you the first 3 chapters, and then you'll just get bi-weekly updates as we move forward. If that sounds of interest to you, please sign up. Other than that, please enjoy the show with David James McCallum. Welcome, David McCallum, to The Conscious Creative. I really appreciate you taking the time, man. And ever since I saw some work of yours online, just the way that you mixed Gaelic language and hip-hop and do it really well. I've been really looking forward to this conversation, so thanks for taking the time, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, man. So I think maybe just some background on what your beginnings in music were and like what your influences growing up were. Like how did you get started at the base level of creating, and what did that look like?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So, I can honestly say I've been doing music since I was a very small child. Like my family are very musical. My mom is a really excellent singer. My dad is a really great guitar player, better than I am. He used to play like a jazz orchestra and stuff like that. So just had musical instruments and music in the house ever since I was a kid. And with my mom's side and the Irish roots in my family, and actually did a little video for St. Patrick's Day with with the family. So that kind of got me off to an early start. And I was really fortunate. Like my parents really encouraged it and just had, there's guitars, and we had a drum kit in our basement when I was a kid, which was just unbelievable. Like the kids could just come over and pound on this drum kit. And by the time I was a teenager, the basement was ours, and we had a drum kit and a couple amps and guitars and drum machines and stuff. So we'd just come home, and our house was the jam house. So it was really good environment for that. And I kind of just picked things up by absorption. And my dad started teaching me bass and guitar when I was about 12 or 13. As far as exposure to music, it was exposed to all kinds of really great traditional Irish music as a kid. And my dad was really into 60s rock and stuff. So I was hearing a lot of Hendrix and, the Who and the Doors and the Beatles and stuff. And I pretty early as a kid got into like heavier music. I was really into the Motley Crue and stuff by the time I was 7 or 8, and Black Sabbath and all that kind of stuff. And also I grew up in Niagara Falls, Ontario. I'm a bit older. So in the 80s, I was really fortunate to, Niagara Falls is right next to the American border, and hip hop really emerged when I was, 5, 6 years old. It started to appear. And first of all, really with the breakdancing, and our school had like a breakdancing team. And, we used to go to the playground and watch these guys breakdance with the boom boxes. It was kind of that era when hip hop and punk rock and metal, it all just kind of exploded in the late 70s, early 80s. And so I feel like I was exposed to that really young. And then when I was a teenager, we kind of moved to a small town in the country. And I got exposed to even country music, like good country music, like Hank Williams, Hank Snow, Merle Haggard, all that kind of outlaw country stuff too. So just a really broad range of stuff. And went from that, and then we sort of started gravitating more to punk, like sort of the other way that a lot of people go. And we got really tired of playing really complicated and difficult music, and we wanted to just play really loud, stupid music. So we still have a band called Tall Pork, which is our punk rock band, and we write original punk rock stuff whenever I'm home in Ontario. I do the vocals, and I usually end up doing the drums too, just in the studio. Drummer, but they have a band that's doing so. Just a lot of diverse kind of influences, and just being surrounded by it all the time. And, some of my family worked in the music industry, so I was meeting musicians at a young age and just seeing that this was kind of a lifestyle. And
so it was your on your mom's side that the traditional Irish music comes from then?
Yeah. So my mom's dad is from Belfast, and they actually, my mom came over on a boat. I always think it's funny, probably the last generation to come on a boat, like in the 50s, from Liverpool. And we always had just a really strong connection to that side of the family. And, we'd go there as kids and stuff. And for what it's worth, I was in Belfast in the 80s and 90s, the height of the Troubles. So I experienced that as a kid, and just the feeling that was there. And, the sort of low-level urban warfare and all that kind of stuff. And, had to kind of experience that and draw my own conclusions about that, which had a big impact on my connection to the culture too, because I started to see that, from my perspective, it's really about culture. It's a clash of cultures, and there's been a deliberate effort to basically eradicate the Gaelic language and culture for centuries now. And the fact that we're still here and growing, and very modern, young population now, with more of an urban, global outlook and stuff. So yeah, that had a big influence on me too. And as far as the music, just hearing it as a kid, and we'd have sing-alongs around the piano and stuff, and it just really, there's a certain nostalgia there, and most people with Irish roots feel like a very emotional connection there. And so it just, I don't know, it just really had an impact on me as a kid. And as far as the language itself, nobody in my immediate family speaks Irish Gaelic. It would have, we've sort of traced it back, and probably 2-3 generations ago it was there. And it's that it has an impact. There's all these weird things my mom would say that I always thought she made up, and then it turns out I learned years later that they're just actually Irish Gaelic words that have persisted in the language, and the more I got into it, I started really learning the language probably in my late teens, like 15, 16 or so, and got a bunch of materials, books and tapes and stuff at the time, and wasn't really learning much off the internet, and sort of got a basis in it at that point. And then, unfortunately kind of put it aside for many years, and I was traveling, and in my 20s and stuff. And then I came back to it. Basically, what happened was I put out a hip hop album. Jeez. Not quite a decade ago, but it was in English, but I sampled a lot of like Irish and Scottish films and stuff, and it was kind of a meditation on my roots through hip hop. And I was contacted by a guy in Scotland named Jim Sutherland, who's quite a well-known composer and musician in Scotland, and he was working on a project called Strulak, which was, excuse me, sort of a big musical project based around it was 2014 was the Scottish independence referendum. The Commonwealth Games were held in Glasgow at the time, so we had this huge stage production. There was like 50 people involved, a lot of the top sort of Scottish Gaelic traditional musicians and singers, and they wanted to get a rapper, like an MC, who could rap in Gaelic. So they asked me if I'd be interested, and just to clarify too for people that don't really know. So when we talk about Gaelic, I mean, the Gaelic is really a family of languages, and you have Irish Gaelic, you have Scottish Gaelic, you have Manx Gaelic. Normally, when people in Ireland refer to it now, they just say Irish. For some reason, they don't really like to hear the Gaelic part. In Scotland, it's Gaelic, but they call it Gaelic, and people get really upset if you say Gaelic. I don't know why. In Canada, the dialects on the East Coast, they say Gaelic. So it's, you know what I mean? So, but to clarify, I mean, Irish Gaelic and Scottish Gaelic are very closely related languages, sort of on par with like Portuguese and Spanish, maybe. So you'd understand a lot of the words. The grammar is a little bit different. The pronunciation is a bit different, but it's not a big stretch to kind of, if you know one, to learn the other. So I had a basis in Irish, and I spent a few years really focusing on Scottish Gaelic or Gaelic, and did this project in Scotland. We recorded an album, we did a few shows. It was epic. I mean, it was great for me. I got to go to Scotland 3 times, stayed in Glasgow for a month, just loved Glasgow, did a big show, learned a lot, came back and immediately enrolled in like distance courses with the college over there, and to do like sort of adult Gaelic to fluency and stuff. And so got pretty fluent in that. And then long story short, in 2016, which of course was the centennial year anniversary of the Irish uprising in 1916. So it was the centennial, and there was a lot of stuff going on around that. And I just kind of had this idea that, you know, I really wanted to learn Irish again, and to fluency, to real, functional fluency. And my idea was, well, you know, there's a great language activist in Belfast, and he had this quote, you know, in Irish, but to translate, he basically said, you know, the language is ours. So you have to learn it, take it, steal it, whatever you can do, pick it up wherever it is. It's yours. So, and I took that to heart, and I thought, well, I really spend any money on this, you know? So and with the internet being what it is, I found more than enough free resources online, and really pushed myself, and then, you know, joined a conversation group. I now have friends over in Ireland. I have conversations every week in Irish, and just really, really pushed myself. So after about 5 years now, I'd say I'm, you know, reasonably fluent. I can express myself, and yeah. So that's the long story short of learning Irish. But
So,
you know, sorry, go ahead.
so both in Irish and in Scottish Gaelic, or
Yeah.
you're basically fluent in both?
I can understand it perfectly well. It's more like you go to form a sentence, and you know, when you have a bunch of languages in your head, sometimes it's hard to keep them separate. You know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, I was basically fluent in both languages. Nowadays, I'm definitely more fluent in Irish.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really impressive. So I kind of want to pull back because I'm just really interested to hear you. You said that you spent some time in Ireland in the 80s, or
In the 80s and 90s, yeah, we had a couple family visits over there, sort of during, you know, what they call the Troubles, which is,
yeah,
put it lightly. And yeah, you know, as a kid going over there from Canada, I mean, you know, I knew that, you know, things were going on over there, but you don't really know until you experience it. And, you know, for example, there were places called control areas in Belfast where if you were to park your car and there was nobody in it, there'd be a bomb squad on that car in 5 seconds, tearing the doors off and, you know, cutting the seats open with box cutters looking for a bomb, because they're, you know, it was a dangerous time. And the feeling of the pressure and the intensity of that situation just really sat with me for a long time. And, you know, it's had a big effect on my understanding of the situation over there, and my position on it too. Like, you know, I'm an outsider. I can't really comment on the politics over there, but to me, what it really comes down to is a cultural struggle for cultural recognition, and just like any other sort of minority culture or oppressed culture, like there's a vested interest in what can we say, the authorities, the state, the colonizer, in keeping that culture down. And I could get more into that about why, but if you look at the history of Ireland, and this is the thing I always say to people. I mean, what other country in Europe, if you wanted to learn about Italian history, you'd learn Italian, right? If you wanted to go to Spain, you'd learn Spanish. But why, when we think about Ireland, do you think people think that you could ever really fully understand the situation if you don't speak the language? Because, prior to the famine in the 1840s, 90% of Ireland was Irish speaking and monolingual. People did not speak English. That was our language, and it was the language of rich and poor, Protestant and Catholic. It was the language of English people that came to Ireland. That was the language, and there's a historical perspective there too. I think that's really valuable, and sort of adopt those colonial privileges and stuff. But the experience in Ireland of colonialism, I think, is a real template for understanding colonialism, and especially British colonialism around the world, because as many people will say, we were kind of the first experiment. and the techniques used in Ireland were then exported around the world, and which also Irish and Scottish people were the victims of colonization and also perpetuated it once we came to the New World. So we're complicit in that as well. But it's a very complex scenario, but there's a lot to learn from that too.
Yeah. Oh. So my next question, and I feel like somehow this is sort of related. I'm just guessing, but I think it's related. Is like you said, a vast influence of music, and then you've chosen to express yourself through punk, folk, and hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
And they're actually really similar musical interests to myself, and like big influences on myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be curious to is there a reason, do you think, that or is there a commonality between all three of those that are the reasons that you chose to express yourself through three genres?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I was thinking about that, and really, from my perspective, what I would say is that, I mean, when you're dealing with traditional music, it's a type of folk music, and when we say folk music, that means it's the common property of a group of people. It's integrated into larger culture. There's a sense of more of a community ownership of it, and there's not the same sort of gatekeeper. And for myself, I guess it's, I just always had that sort of mindset with music. Um, I gravitated more towards things that were maybe not simpler, but with a lot of classical music, the emphasis is more on the form than on the content or the emotion. And with folk music, it just really comes from people's lived experience, and they're expressing themselves in the means that they have at the time. So in this way, and not to sound corny or anything, but I remember Mos Def said this too. He said hip hop is folk music, and I really consider punk rock a form of folk music, absolutely, and even structurally compared to country music and folk music. I mean, we're using the same instruments, they're just electric and really loud, and a lot of the same sort of chord sequences, structures, ideas about songs. So structurally, there's similarities, I would say, but also just the content and the emphasis on this is something that comes from your heart and your soul, and you're really trying to express your conditions at the time. There's also like a real focus on lyrics too, which, I mean, that's, to me, I play guitar. I'm an okay guitar player. I'll never consider myself a great guitar player because I know great guitar players, right? And I'm a pretty good singer, but I'm not like the greatest singer of all. But what I really have always focused on is lyrics. And with hip hop, I mean, that became like an obsession. You know what I mean? When you're in that zone as a young MC, and you're just like, your room is covered in sheets of paper that you're just scrawling lyrics on, and you go to bed at night thinking of rhymes in your head, and you know what I mean, it sort of takes over your brain, and that emphasis on just the quality of the lyrics, how to express things really succinctly, structure of them and stuff. And I mean, that's a whole other thing to talk about, just the quality of the lyrics in older music, and the ability, it transports you. I always say, like, music is if you want a time machine, sing a song, because some of these Irish songs that I'm learning, and I was telling you, I'm doing a class once a week with a really great traditional singer in Ireland, and we do songs that are 300 years old plus. And the mindset that you get from those songs, and the lived experience of people from centuries ago. I mean, it's just an invaluable window into their lives, and also the quality of the art. I mean, it's kind of like any folk art. Like, you go back and you look at the weaving, or embroidery, or wood carving or something like that, and these people, like, this is at a level of high art, and the lyricism. I mean, with, even if you don't understand the language, if you're really into the structure of rhyme and how people put words together and stuff, you can't beat these old songs, because they'll rhyme 8 syllables together
Yeah.
for bar after bar after bar. And like the old songs, I mean, I'll learn 4 or 5 verses of a song. Some of these songs have 60, 70 verses. They would take you 5 hours to sing the whole thing, because they were written for working, or oh, I've got to walk 50 miles, I'm going to sing a song the whole way. You know what I mean? And the other thing, to ramble on, but about lyrics, is I always tell people, like, once you really get into the old Irish and Gaelic and Scottish writing, and people talk about bards. Well, bard is a Gaelic word, and in the old days, you couldn't just call yourself a bard. Like, you had to study for 10 years. You had to have enough stories and songs that you could tell a different story and sing songs all night for every night of a year. That was the bard of that. And a lot of these people couldn't read and write. So this is in an illiterate oral society, and people think, well, how did they do that? And I can honestly say that in my study of the lyrics, the further back you go, and if you're getting lyrics from people that were illiterate, the quality of the complexity of the rhyme and the imagery is that much higher with people that were illiterate, because they weren't thinking about words on a page. They weren't thinking about how they're spelled. They're thinking about how they sound and the pictures they conjure in their head. And the techniques people would use back in those days. This is here's the great secret I'll impart to your audience. Well, how does an illiterate person write a 70-verse poem where every line rhymes perfectly over 5, 6 syllables? They would look at the rows of stones in the wall of their cabin, and they would count the stones. Be like, okay, stones, okay, like consonant, verb, consonant, you know what I mean? Like, and they would use that to structure their rhyme. So there's, you know what I mean, that there was a technique of, and people talk about rhyme, in oral societies was used to memorize vast amounts of material too, right? So you think, like, there's this sort of idea you get in English that, well, words are just words and they're just sounds and you sort of correspond to things. That's not the Gaelic attitude at all. These words have power, and when you say them correctly, they create a resonance in the universe that, for lack of a better word, I mean, it's a real form of magic. I mean, that's what magic was. People talk about sorcery and stuff, and the Druids. I mean, the Druids were all about music and poetry, because that's how they transmitted their wisdom, and incantations and this sort of thing. And it has a consciousness altering effect. You know what I mean? It can change the way you see the world. And if that's not magic, I don't know what is. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, that kind of reminds me of some things that I've heard about Sanskrit as well, in terms of words having resonance, and it just being maybe a little bit more spiritual of a language than English is.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to, it's obviously a very personal thing, and it's kind of a relative thing. But my experience, and just working with the difference, and I write lyrics in English, and I sing songs in English too, and it's not that you can't reach that level of significance and power with English. It's just that there is a different resonance with different languages, and there's a different viewpoint. And if anything, those listening who don't really have much of an idea about the Celtic languages in general, because we're talking about Gaelic, but the Celtic languages also include Welsh, Breton. Like, Celtic languages were once widely spread all over Europe. It was one of the very common forms, and then it's pushed to the west. But Celtic languages have a very different outlook than other European languages, and at the risk of sounding preposterous. I would say the Celtic languages, and my experience in Irish and Gaelic, is that they're less materialistic than English. They're less ego-centered. They're more community-based, and they're more sort of animistic. Like there's an attitude that the world is alive and is responding to you, and you need to treat it with respect and a view towards animals and plants and even features of the natural world. I mean, there's this common thing people say, oh, well, in the Inuit language, well, they have 80 words for snow. Well, in Scottish Gaelic, there's 200 words for different types of mountains, because so that you can describe exactly, and quite often they're based on human body parts, and not all of them polite. You know what I mean? There's a lot of place names in Scotland that you translate them, you're like, okay, that is what it looks like. You know what I mean? But for example, the easiest example I always give with, let's say, Irish and Scottish Gaelic in terms of the difference with English is there's no verb in the Gaelic languages for to have. You don't have anything. So you literally cannot say, I have a lot of money, I have a nice car, I have a big house. The equivalent, you could say, well, there's a lot of money with me. There's a nice car with me. There is a nice house with me. Sort of takes away that, it changes your perspective. You know what I mean? Words have power. And I mean, we're dealing with that in English now in terms of inclusive pronouns and in terms of breaking down a lot of the colonial structures that are embedded in English. And if people think that language is fixed and you can't change it, that's just the way it is, they need to study other languages, because languages change and move all the time, and they seriously affect your outlook on life. This is my perspective. It's very important that people are conscious of what they say, how it means, because when you learn and speak other languages, your thinking changes, your personality changes. You know, my not hugely, but and I always say to people, man, this is why I love having conversations in Irish and stuff. Is like, we're just laughing our heads off half the time. Like a conversation in Irish is like half jokes. It's just constant, puns and witticisms and jokes, and we're constantly laughing, and that's just sort of the nature of the language, and having a conversation that way. So it has an effect.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So cool. These are definitely things that I've thought about a little bit before, but maybe didn't pursue the ideas far enough to have a real understanding of it, or real knowledge of it. So it's really interesting to hear you say these things as speaking from experience. And yeah, I'd be curious. I saw you mention, and you kind of alluded to it in answering the last question, of understanding the lyrics and the songs of traditional Gaelic folk songs has taught you lessons that are like a cure for the modern mind. Is there anything you can point to, or any huge lessons or messages that you've found that have been a salve for you, or helped guide you, or anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. I even took some notes because I had a lot of thoughts about that. And I'd say the first and foremost thing that you'll learn from the attitude from old Irish songs is the attitude of resilience, endurance, stoicism. I mean, we're talking about, Ireland has been under active colonization by England, and before that by the Vikings, for almost 1,000 years. You know what I mean? So we're talking a long time in it. You go back in the history, and the historical trauma just goes on and on and on. The oldest song I know at this point is from the 600s, I believe. And that it's more of a spiritual song, but it's very beautiful, and the sort of elemental imagery and stuff is very powerful. But as you get into the songs from 300, 200 years ago, we're talking about the time of Cromwell. We're getting into the uprisings, and in the mid 1800s, we're talking about the Great Famine, which the phrase, one of the phrases in Irish for that time is, we call it an drochiel, which literally means the bad life, because we're living the drochiel, the bad life. There was famine, there was political oppression. It was technically illegal for a lot of people to even speak Irish. You couldn't own a horse, this and that. So people endured such unbelievable oppression and just disenfranchisement and lack of control over their own destinies and malnutrition, all this type of stuff. And they endured and they survived and they kept that attitude of sort of internal freedom and strength and resilience and humor and beauty. And that's the other thing. And a lot of people will talk about this now, that there's such a, obviously it's a very personal, subjective thing, but there's a very huge emphasis in Irish language and culture on beauty and the appreciation of the beauty of the natural world, the beauty of human society and your family, the beauty of love, the beauty. Quite often it's tragic, and when you get into some of these times, it's like it's always tinged with a very dark melancholy, and the song will end with, "Oh, and by the way, I'm dying," so. But there's a real focus on beauty. As I was saying, there's a lot of focus on humor and wit and sort of getting the better of your superiors and pulling one over on them, because you'll never have any true power. So the best you can do is kind of prank them, so to speak. There's a real community feeling and an idea of generosity is something that's very important in the culture, and sharing, and even at times when there were Irish and Scottish Gaelic speaking chieftains and leaders, they were expected to be incredibly generous with their people. And the worst thing you could lose your position as a leader if you were stingy and didn't share your food or your wealth. And the phrase in Scottish Gaelic, which I think is a great phrase, is tresa tua na chearna. Tribe is stronger than the chief. And that's always, so there's a real, you get like socialists and communists talking about traditional Highland society and saying this is actually the closest to a real functioning communist society that there was, because everybody was equal. And even if you were rich and powerful, well, all they had to do was make fun of you. And I should mention that too, the power of satire in these songs. And the bards of old had huge power because they knew that, especially in an illiterate oral society, if they could, if they had beef with some chieftain or and made a good song and that caught on with the people, that was the power we had, the power of the word, the power of, and even, the idea of cursing, very powerful concept in Gaelic culture, and among people that are just more devoutly religious than you could possibly imagine in Christian times. They still felt that the power of the curse, like if somebody was deserving of a curse, if they had cleared you and your family from the land and stolen all your sheep and cast you away to the winds, it was your duty to curse and you would curse them, and these curses would come true. And the image, this is a great image from an old tale about cursing, was that a curse is like splitting a log of wood when you hit it with an axe. If there is a crack, and if that axe finds purchase in the wood, it will split. If not, it's going to bounce right back in your face. But if that wood was meant to split, then you got to split it. So that cursing, and it's it has a very negative connotation in English now, but in the traditional society, it's almost a duty to take that power with the words. And so I curse you. It sounds crazy, honestly, to a modern mind, but that's the difference. That was there now, and yeah. So and mentioned a lot of things, and just a last note about what you can get from these old songs is just the emphasis on culture. What we call shanachas, which shan just means old. So shanachas is a word which it translates as kind of lore. But when we talk about shanachas, it's just the learning and accumulated knowledge and wisdom of the ancestors. And that's preserved in songs and stories and poems. And it's very important to pass that on, because we have stories and songs. As I said, I know a song that goes back to the 600s. Some of the stories go back to the Bronze Age, and we can look back at our ancestors and their experiences, good and bad, and they were very careful to record, not all of our ancestors were great people. We were headhunting pagans before the Christians came, so, and we're very, very honest about that. So there's just a huge respect for the past, for the continuation of the past into the present, the idea that, the past is not, even 1,000 years is not that long ago, and you can go there right now in your mind and in your spirit if you have access to that shanachas. So it's a very strong very strong bond. And I mean, I'm also, among other things, I'm currently working on a psychology BA, and I'm interested, working in clinical counseling. And a big part of my studies is about historical trauma, cultural loss, and the impact that has on the individual, and also the positive impacts of cultural reclamation, of having a connection to your language, your culture, your land. And so many studies have shown, especially with First Nations, health outcomes for people are much better if they have their language and their culture, even in the same situation, eating the same food, same life stresses. If you have that connection to your roots, it's an anchor that is missing in so many people's lives now. And the modern attitude is, well, the past is old fashioned and we don't have much to learn from that. We're so much smarter now. And it's like, no, man, we're not that smart these days,
Wow, so powerful. I appreciate these answers so much, David. So yeah, I just have one question before we wrap it up. Um, and that is, what impact do you want to leave in the world with your creativity or your work?
Well, it's a lot of things, and I think it's the big one is that connection to the past and giving people, and inspiring people, hopefully, to connect with their own roots, whatever those may be, because everybody has ancestral roots that are worth connecting with. It doesn't matter where you're from, if you're from Germany or Lithuania, if you're from Southeast Asia, wherever. We all have our ancestors are there for us. We're just waiting for us to ask them for help, and so to kind of inspire that attitude, and to inspire specifically with Irish and Gaelic culture. The project that I was working on in Scotland, the big motivation of that was to kind of contemporize the culture, because there's more so in Scotland, I'd say there's more of a feeling that, oh, it's very old fashioned, sort of old people and country people are interested in it. So we wanted to kind of contemporize the culture and make music that was current, and to show that it's valid in a modern context, that it has something of value for us. It's a treasure. These are intangible cultural treasures that, if lost, would just be an incredible shame, not just for us, but for the whole world. And when shared, also encourages. I'm really into hip hop in any kind of minority language, or just less common language, because it's such a adaptable form, and it gives people a way to bring their own culture to a different register of art, and to share it with the world that way. So to kind of to encourage that, and just generally in terms of just making music, in English, Irish, punk rock, whatever, it's all about inspiring people and encouraging people and giving them something, to keep them going. Because let's face it, I mean, life is really hard wherever you are, and it's only getting harder. And the world right now, I mean, we've really seen over the last year how valuable the arts are, in a time of global lockdown. Like, we need creativity to feed our souls, and to provide us with emotional release, and all this things. So, hopefully, beyond just all the technical things and the art and this and that. I mean, to me, ultimately, music, the most important thing with music is the emotion. I mean, you're trying to literally take that emotion and project it outward so other people can experience that. And it's the beauty of it. And I honestly, it's difficult, because creativity is something you can never really nail down. And you kind of got to catch yourself by surprise. And the great ideas come at the strangest of times, when you're doing the dishes or whatever. So you have to do the work, and you have to just create a space in your home where you can just work immediately. You need to push yourself and have that work ethic, and be like, I'm going to sit down and try and come up with something, and treat it like a job, and have that work ethic. But at the same time, and I mean, this is just my opinion, a lot of great work comes from like laboring over it, and rehashing and editing. But the best stuff, creativity comes like a bolt of light, and it's going to hit you, and it's going to go through you. So it's about making yourself that vessel for that energy, because it's you know you're channeling something bigger than yourself. and it's you're getting beyond your ego. So you want to get your skills to a certain level, you want the work ethic to a certain level, and then you want to, whatever it takes to find that place where suddenly you're going to get hit with these flashes of inspiration, and you'll know. And sometimes, for me, there's been times in my life where I've taken a year or 2 years off, and I haven't really written or recorded anything. I've just been digesting and stuff. And funny enough, like the lockdown has been very productive time for me because I've had a lot more time, and I've had the frustrations of life and need an outlet for it. And it's so you just have to make yourself open to creativity and nurture it like you're growing a garden and you're planting the seeds. And to me, like, that's why, I work in so many different styles and genres, because, they all come really natural to me. But also, it's like, if ever I feel like I'm kind of hitting the wall with one thing, you're like, man, honestly, I never get tired of playing traditional music because it just sort of feeds my soul. And I really don't get tired of any other music. But yeah, with all creative arts, sometimes feel like, man, I'm just kind of screaming into the void and nobody's really getting what I'm doing, or I'm not kind of hitting the wall. Well, try something else, pick up a different instrument, pushing yourself to do something different. And eventually, when you got like 5 pots boiling on the stove, so something's going to come up, right? That's my attitude, is just keep throwing stuff at the wall until it sticks, because you will find that creativity just starts to flow through you like that, and when you really find your own source of it. That's a long answer, but
I I think, like, for myself right now, what I'm trying to do is sort of like work on the technical aspects in the studio.
Mhm.
I've been on a digesting break for the past year, and I'm just getting back into writing right now. And I'm finding, like, work on the technical aspects in the studio, and then the only thing that I've ever experienced that has not 100% return in terms of good creative ideas, but a pretty high percentage, is walks in the woods. Like,
Oh, 100%.
it is
100%. Your best lyrics, like, actually I would say that, if as far as my method, um, verses, bars like that, sit down and write them,
yeah,
comb over them like a piece of embroidery. But choruses, hooks, melodies, that's going to come to you on a walk.
yeah,
Every time, or doing the dishes. but most of the time on a walk. Go out, if you can't think of anything, just go for a walk,
yeah,
and don't take your earbuds out. Just listen to
yeah,
the birds, listen to the sky train if you have to. Just
yeah,
open yourself up and go for a walk. Because yeah, it stimulates your brain more than anything. Just
yeah,
being outside,
yeah.
for sure.
Oh, thanks so much, David.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
Just before we head out, where can people reach you at or check out your music? Where would you like to send people to?
Yeah, I'm kind of got it in a few different places now, and I'm hopefully going to put together just a single website. But all of my music is available on Bandcamp right now. So for the hip hop, it's Corvid .bandcamp.com, which is Corvid bandcamp.com. For my acoustic music, which includes the new EP I just of traditional Irish songs, as well as my original songs in English, that's under David James McCallum, bandcamp.com, and McCallum is McCallum. The punk rock stuff, the punk rock band is called Tall Pork, Tallpork, bandcamp.com. So those are my sort of 3 main sites for music. And yeah, I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. So yeah, doing a little show on April 23rd. Going to be doing some acoustic tunes and some new material and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So again, that's a show on April 23rd, which will be a couple days after this comes out, right? April 23rd it is?
yeah, April 23rd. It's Friday.
And it's on, sorry, what was the,
So it's through Side Door Access, which is this really great site that's promoting and putting on online shows, ticketed online shows. They've been a
cool,
real
cool.
huge help through this lockdown.
Yeah, yeah. And there will be links for that below. So, yeah, thanks so much again. This was a great chat. I feel like we scratched the surface. I kind of want to invite you on again sometime and
Oh, anytime, man. I'm happy to talk
learn a
about
bit
stuff. Yeah,
more, man,
that's
because
great.
yeah, really, really interesting. So yeah, thanks again, David.
Yeah, thanks a million. This has been great. Great talking with you. Thanks so much.
So I want to say thanks again to David and just go over a couple things that I thought were really interesting and really poignant from the show. My first is his thoughts on folk music and punk rock and hip hop all being folk music essentially. And I love that so much. I heard a long time ago that hip hop was folk music. It's music of the people, and it's not necessarily treated as such all the time. So I really think it's important that we view these types of creativity as having a similar spirit and having a similar motive of telling the story of the common people. And beyond that, I think it's really interesting to hear someone speak about learning languages, different languages. I've heard from people like Tim Ferriss who say that, learning a language really changes the way you view the world because you understand how much culture is built into a language. So if you learn an Asian language, you'll understand that culture more. And that's what David spoke about, is understanding the indigenous cultures of Ireland and Scotland. And I think it's really important, especially if you're an MC, to understand words and understand their power and what they do to evoke emotion and how they resonate with people. Because at the end of the day, we use language to communicate with people. And the better we are at it, the more nuance we understand of it, the better we will be at it. So, I'm not saying that you should go learn Gaelic, but by all means, if you feel like you want to, do it. But more, try and understand how culture is built into the languages that we speak, and think about your words and how they affect people and how you can use them to affect people in a positive or paint a story more effectively. I think those are the main sort of takeaways from the conversation, and I just want to say thanks for listening. Again, if you want to sign up for that PDF, there's a link in the show notes that you can sign up with. I'm really enjoying that series with people. Really enjoyed this conversation with David James McCallum. He has a show coming up on Side Door, which we will have a link for in the show notes. And other than that, take care, work hard but not too hard, and love yourself.